The silence didn't begin when Earth walked out. It began when the stars stopped answering. At first, no one noticed. In a galaxy saturated with noise, trade pings, diplomatic relays, war simulations humming quietly beneath treaties, silence was easy to overlook. A delayed signal here, a flicker of static there. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Until it spread. A mining colony on the fringe of the Perseus Arm sent a routine status update. No reply. A council envoy attempted to reroute communications through 3 independent channels. Each one returned nothing but a hollow, echoing void. Not interference, not sabotage, just absence, as if the universe itself had chosen not to respond. Inside the Galactic Council's grand chamber, where gravity curved elegantly to accommodate species of every form, the first ripple of unease passed like a shadow. Ancient beings who had witnessed supernovae bloom and galaxies collide now shifted in quiet discomfort. Their instruments were flawless, their networks infallible, and yet, systems that had spoken for millennia had gone mute in an instant. Then came the realization. Every silence traced back to the same moment, the same decision. The moment Earth stood up and walked out. The memory replayed in countless minds, sharp and unwelcome. A human delegate, fragile by galactic standards, brief-lived, bound to primitive biology, yet unshaken. No raised voice, no threat. Just a calm, measured tone that somehow carried more weight than fleets or firepower. We will no longer participate. At the time, it had seemed absurd, almost insulting. Humanity, the youngest among them, rejecting the Council's authority. They had expected hesitation, regret, a request to return. Instead, they received nothing. Now entire sectors were falling quiet, trade routes dimmed, outposts reported empty skies where traffic should have been constant. Automated beacons designed to scream into eternity whispered once, and died. Panic didn't erupt. Not yet. The Council was too old, too composed for panic. But fear crept in slowly, insidiously, because this silence wasn't chaotic. It wasn't random. It was deliberate. Somewhere beyond their reach, beyond their understanding, something had shifted. Something vast, something patient. In the center of the chamber, illuminated by the soft glow of 1,000 stars projected in miniature, one seat remained empty. Humanity's seat. Still warm, still waiting, and for the first time since the Council's formation, no one dared to fill it. Because deep down, beneath layers of logic, beneath centuries of certainty, they all felt the same impossible thought tightening like a vice. Earth hadn't just left. Earth had taken something with it. Commander Elias Varn stood alone at the edge of the observation deck, where the glass wasn't really glass at all, but a lattice of adaptive crystal, bending light and radiation into something the human eye could almost understand. Beyond it, the Galactic Council's megastructure hung in space like a broken halo. Vast, ancient, impossibly intricate. Rings within rings rotated in slow, deliberate harmony. Each segment home to species older than Earth's oceans. Each light a civilization that had long ago mastered everything. Humanity still struggled to comprehend, and yet they were leaving it behind. The UNS horizon drifted in absolute silence, its hull absorbing starlight instead of reflecting it. No engine flare, no ion trails, just a shadow among shadows. Elias could feel the hum of the ship beneath his boots, a low, steady vibration like a heartbeat, reassuring and ominous all at once. Behind him, the rest of Earth's fleet waited in formation, hundreds of vessels aligned with mathematical precision. They weren't built to impress. No gleaming spires or ceremonial wings like the Council ships. These were lean, angular, purposeful, every line carved for efficiency. Every system designed with one philosophy in mind. Endure first, retaliate if necessary. Elias exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the inner layer of the viewport before the system cleared it instantly. His reflection stared back at him for a moment, tired eyes, jaw set tighter than he remembered. He hadn't slept since the session ended. Since that moment, it had taken centuries for humanity to earn a seat in that chamber. Generations of negotiation, of compromise, of proving again and again that they weren't just another volatile species clawing for space. They had followed every rule, signed every treaty, accepted every limitation placed upon them. Too many limitations. He turned slightly, glancing toward the command core where muted voices echoed behind sealed doors. Orders were being confirmed. Protocols activated. Layers of contingency unfolding like something rehearsed long before today. Because this wasn't sudden. Not really. Humanity had seen the pattern years ago. Expansion zones denied under vague pretexts. Research projects quietly restricted. Entire branches of technology labeled destabilizing and locked behind council authority. At first it had felt like guidance, protection even, but over time the truth sharpened. They weren't being guided, they were being contained. Elias clenched his hands behind his back, watching as the council station grew smaller, its once overwhelming presence shrinking into something distant, almost fragile. Strange, he thought, for something so powerful to suddenly look so finite. A soft chime broke the silence. His neural implant pulsed gently, feeding him a stream of data. Fleet alignment confirmed, stealth system synchronized, communication blackout holding across all channels. Earth had gone dark, completely, no outgoing signals, no incoming ones acknowledged. For the rest of the galaxy, humanity had simply vanished, and that was the point. "Commander?" A voice came through, calm but edged with something unspoken. "All units are ready, awaiting your confirmation." Elias didn't answer immediately. His gaze lingered on the shrinking light of the council, on the place humanity had fought so hard to join, and had just willingly abandoned. A flicker of doubt brushed against him, quick, dangerous. Were they making a mistake? Walking away from the oldest alliance in known existence? Then he remembered the looks in that chamber, the quiet dismissals, the decisions made for humanity, never with them. No, this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. His voice, when it came, was steady. Final. Proceed. And with that single word, the horizon shifted. Barely perceptible, but enough. The fleet followed in perfect unison, turning away from the council, from diplomacy, from everything they had once believed they needed. Out there, beyond mapped space, beyond rules and permissions, something waited. And for the first time in its history, humanity was going to meet it on its own terms. The warnings didn't arrive all at once. They crept in, fragmented, almost polite. At the edge of human space, a listening post near the Kuiper expanse picked up the first anomaly. A distortion in long-range telemetry, subtle but unmistakable. Not a signal, something heavier. Mass moving in coordinated silence. The operators flagged it, forwarded it up the chain. Routine contained. Then a second report came. Then a third. Within hours, the pattern emerged. On the tactical display inside the UNS horizon, glowing vectors began to bloom like veins across the void, thin at first, then multiplying, converging toward a single destination, Earth. Every line traced back to Council territory. Every trajectory carried the same cold precision. Sanctions followed, broadcast across every remaining open frequency. Trade privileges revoked, access corridors sealed, diplomatic immunity nullified. The language was measured, almost regretful, a necessary response to non-compliance. But Elias Varn had read enough between the lines to feel the truth settle deep in his chest like iron. This wasn't discipline. This was preparation. Visual confirmation incoming, a sensor officer murmured, her voice quieter than protocol allowed. The main viewport shifted, filtering distant starlight into clarity. And there, far beyond what human optics should have resolved, something moved. At first it looked like a shimmer, then a fracture, then structure. Vast formations sliding between stars, their silhouettes bending light as though space itself made way for them. Council fleets, not one, not two, dozens. Civilizations that hadn't waged open war in thousands of years were mobilizing in perfect synchronization. Their ships were colossal, alien geometries layered with technologies humanity could barely comprehend. Fields within fields, weapons that didn't glow or hum but waited. Patient. Absolute. Elias felt a chill crawl up his spine. Not fear, not exactly. Something colder. Recognition. They're not posturing, he said almost to himself. Around him, the command deck remained eerily calm. No raised voices. No frantic movement. Just controlled efficiency. Data flowed across translucent displays, officers exchanging confirmations in clipped tones. But beneath it all, tension. Tight. Coiled. Because every person in that room understood the same thing, even if no one dared to say it out loud. If those fleets crossed the boundary line, there would be no second chances. Elias turned from the viewport, his gaze settling on the central core where a faint, almost invisible pulse flickered beneath layers of encryption. Most of the crew couldn't even see it. It didn't exist on standard systems. It wasn't meant to. A countdown, ancient, hidden, running long before this confrontation ever began. He had learned about it years ago. Buried so deep in classified archives it felt more like myth than strategy. A contingency not designed for victory, but for survival at a scale that defied comprehension. "Time?" he asked quietly. A pause. Then, advancing as expected, Commander. No numbers. No specifics. Just confirmation. Elias nodded once, slow and deliberate, then looked back toward the approaching darkness beyond the stars. The Council thought humanity had gone silent out of fear, that they were retreating, isolating. They had no idea what that silence truly meant. Outside, the first wave of Council ships edged closer to the invisible threshold of human space. No weapons fired, no declarations made, just presence, overwhelming, unyielding, a final warning without words. And still, Earth did not answer. No transmissions, no defenses raised, no attempt to negotiate. Only the quiet hum of the horizon, and the steady, inevitable pulse of something waiting to be unleashed. The truth was never meant to be found. It wasn't hidden behind firewalls or buried in encrypted data vaults. It was sealed beneath time itself, locked away in places no one thought to question. Beneath the Mariana Trench, where the pressure could crush cities into dust. Beneath Antarctic ice older than human memory. Beneath layers of stone that predated civilization, predated history. Elias Varn had seen it once, just once, and even now, standing aboard the UNS Horizon as entire fleets gathered to erase his species, he could still feel the weight of that moment pressing against his mind. It hadn't looked like technology. There were no circuits, no metal, no recognizable structure, just vast geometric formations carved into the fabric of reality itself, angles that shouldn't exist, surfaces that seemed to shift when observed directly. The deeper the scans went, the less sense it made. Instruments failed. Readings contradicted themselves. Time stuttered. They called it a relic at first, then a construct. Eventually they stopped calling it anything at all, because names implied understanding, and this was something far beyond that. The first breakthrough hadn't come from science. It had come from accident. A fluctuation barely measurable triggered during an unauthorized deep core excavation. For a fraction of a second, space folded. Not violently, not catastrophically, just enough to erase a section of matter as if it had never existed. No energy release. No debris, just absence, clean, absolute. That was the moment everything changed. Humanity hadn't built faster than light travel. They had activated it, piece by piece, carefully, unknowingly following pathways that had been laid out long before they ever reached the stars. Every jump route, every stabilized corridor, it all traced back to the same impossible network woven beneath their world. A network that wasn't meant for travel. It was meant for control. The Council had known. Not the full truth, but enough. Fragments recovered from extinct civilizations. Warnings encoded in ruins scattered across dead systems. Mentions of a species that had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only whispers of a mechanism that could reshape reality itself. A failsafe. Not a weapon of conquest, but of correction. And Earth, by chance, by fate, or by design, had been built on top of it. Elias closed his eyes briefly, remembering the Council's reaction the day humanity unknowingly revealed a fragment of its capability. The shift in tone, the sudden restrictions, the quiet urgency behind every protective measure imposed afterward. They hadn't been guiding humanity. They had been containing a variable they didn't dare provoke. Because if the network ever fully awakened, it wouldn't wage war. It wouldn't negotiate. It would decide. Back in the present, the faint pulse beneath the horizon systems grew just slightly stronger, still invisible to most, still buried beneath layers of secrecy so deep they bordered on myth. But Elias knew what it meant. The system was no longer dormant. Across Earth, beneath oceans and ice and stone, something ancient was waking up, not with sound, not with light, but with a quiet, deliberate awareness that stretched beyond space itself. The Council fleets thought they were approaching a species on the verge of surrender. They didn't realize they were drifting closer to the epicenter of something far older than their oldest records. Something that had waited patiently through the rise and fall of civilizations. Something that had finally found a species willing to use it. And when it did, the galaxy wouldn't burn. It would simply disappear. Authorization confirmed. The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They settled into the command deck of the UNS Horizon like gravity, inescapable, absolute. Every officer froze for a fraction of a second, not out of hesitation, but recognition. This was the point of no return. Not a battle command, not a defensive maneuver, a decision. Elias Varn's hand hovered over the interface, though he had already spoken the words. The system had already begun. Around him, the ship dimmed almost imperceptibly as power rerouted into channels that didn't officially exist. Displays flickered, not failing but changing. Their data replaced by patterns that no human code had written. Lines curved where they should have been straight. Coordinates folded inward on themselves. Outside, the first wave of Council fleets crossed the threshold into human space. They came without hesitation. Vast, luminous constructs cutting through the darkness with silent authority. Ships the size of continents wrapped in layers of shielding that distorted starlight into halos. Their formations were flawless, their intent unmistakable. They weren't here to threaten. They were here to end it. Multiple target locks detected, a voice reported, steady but strained. They're preparing, the sentence never finished, because in that instant, reality shifted. Not violently, not with explosions or shockwaves. There was no fire, no sound. Just a subtle, impossible distortion, as if space itself had inhaled. Stars bent inward, their light stretching into thin, trembling lines. The void between ships thickened, warped by something unseen. Something vast. Elias felt it before he understood it. A pressure behind his eyes. A hum deep in his bones. Not physical. Something deeper. Like the universe itself was being rewritten just slightly out of sync with his perception. Then it happened. The lead Council armada, thousands of ships, millions of lives, simply ceased. No flash. No debris. One moment they were there, immense, unstoppable. And the next, they weren't. The stars behind them snapped back into place as if nothing had ever blocked their light. Sensor arrays screamed, flooding the deck with impossible readings. Mass values dropping to zero. Energy signatures collapsing into mathematical absurdity. Confirm visual, confirm. There's nothing there. Another voice whispered, barely audible. There's nothing. Elias didn't move. Couldn't. His eyes were locked on the emptiness where an entire fleet had just existed. Not destroyed. Not scattered, removed, and it didn't stop. Across the system, across every vector where Council forces advanced, the same distortion rippled outward. Calm. Precise. Inevitable. Ships vanished mid-formation. Weapons dissolved before they could fire. Even the faint trails of their passage were erased, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt unnatural. This wasn't war. There was no struggle. No resistance. Just correction. The network had awakened fully now. Elias could feel it. Not as a machine, not as a weapon, but as something aware in a way he couldn't explain. It wasn't angry. It wasn't merciful. It simply acted following a logic older than any civilization that had ever lived. A single transmission pulsed outward from Earth then. Untraceable, unavoidable, embedded not in signals but in the structure of space itself. Every system, every species, every mind capable of understanding received it all at once. Not in words, but meaning. Humanity chooses its own fate. Elias exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest unraveling into something heavier than relief. Around him, the crew stood in stunned silence, staring into a void that had just swallowed an empire's worth of power without effort. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council wasn't the apex of the stars anymore, and humanity had never looked more terrifying. Days passed, or what passed for days in a galaxy that had just forgotten how to measure certainty. The Galactic Council chamber still stood in perfect symmetry, rings of polished matter orbiting a hollow core where gravity bent like a whispered secret. Nothing was damaged. Nothing was broken, and yet, everything was different. The noise was gone. Where once there had been a constant hum of overlapping voices, translations layered over alien frequencies, debates spanning light years in real time, There was now only a low ambient silence. Not empty, not peaceful, watchful. Representatives still gathered, but they no longer argued. They no longer projected authority with grand gestures or ancient rites. Movements were slower now, calculated. Even the oldest among them, beings who had seen civilizations rise and collapse like tides, carried something unfamiliar in their presence. Caution. At the center of it all, illuminated by a soft convergence of starlight, one seat remained unoccupied. Humanity's seat. No one approached it. Not out of respect, out of understanding. Because that empty space was no longer symbolic, it was a boundary. A reminder etched into the collective consciousness of the galaxy. There were forces at play now that the Council could neither regulate nor comprehend. Fragments of data still circulated through restricted channels, sensor ghosts, mathematical impossibilities. Entire fleets reduced to null values in records that refused to accept deletion as an outcome. The more they analyzed, the less sense it made. There had been no attack, no weapon signature, no trace of intent beyond a single undeniable conclusion. Humanity had drawn a line, and reality itself had enforced it. No vote was called for retaliation. No proposals were raised. Even the most militant factions remained silent, their strategies dissolving before they could be spoken aloud. Because deep down, every species in that chamber had reached the same quiet realization. You cannot fight something that doesn't need to fight back. Far from the Council, beyond their reach and their failing models, Earth turned quietly beneath its sun. Blue oceans shimmered. Winds moved across continents. Cities breathed with the rhythm of billions of ordinary lives continuing, unaware of how close everything had come to ending. Children laughed. Markets opened. Signals flickered back online, controlled, deliberate, human. Nothing about it looked like power, and yet it was. In orbit, the UNS horizon drifted in silent watch, its dark hull reflecting the curve of the world below. Inside the observation deck, Elias Varn stood once more before the vast expanse of space. But now it felt different. Not hostile. Not uncertain. Just quiet. He studied the stars, half expecting them to flicker again, to bend under the weight of something unseen. But they held steady, distant, and cold as they always had. As if nothing had happened. As if everything hadn't changed. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, older somehow. Not in years, but in understanding. He had seen what humanity was capable of unleashing, felt it move through the fabric of existence like a thought too large to contain. Victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like responsibility. We didn't win, he said softly, the words barely more than a breath against the silence. For a moment there was nothing, just the hum of the ship, and the distant pulse of a world that had chosen its own path. Then he straightened slightly, his gaze hardening, not with pride, but with clarity. We reminded them. A pause. Who we are,